So we're going to be talking about Purview for Microsoft 365 Copilot and agents. And as we already mentioned, I'm Principal Solution Engineer here at Microsoft, focusing on the compliance solution and primarily around data security. So today's agenda, we're going to be doing the high level of the Copilot control system. We're going to address some oversharing concerns, protect against data loss and insider risk, and govern AI use to meet regulatory and policy, right? So Copilot's built on a trust that's been built over many years with commitments and controls from Microsoft, as well as the tools that help you control your environment with your data. So we help protect your data with encryption at rest and in transit, rigorous physical security controls, and data isolation. Sorry, there we go. Our time-tested approach to data privacy is grounded in our commitment to give you control over your data, but in the cloud. You control your data. Microsoft guarantees the controls with contractual commitments. You may be familiar with the DPA, the Data Processor Agreement, or things like the Business Associate Agreement, et cetera. So those are different kinds of contractual controls which guarantee your control over your data. Prompts, responses, web search queries, and Copilot aren't used to train foundational models. So that's very important. Again, that's your data. You control how it's used. And then we help safeguard against AI-focused risks such as harmful content, prompt injections, copyright concerns, etc. So just a little bit of the background as we kind of move into Purview. Again, you can find all of these on our trust portal, all the different types of attestations that we have around ISO and SOC, GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, etc. So let's talk a little bit about the Copilot control system. So again, Michael and Adam have done a great job about talking about a few of these things, and I know the next webinar is going to be focused on the SharePoint Advanced Management, so that will be covered as well under the Copilot control system. But today we're going to be focused here on the security and governance side around data security, AI security, and compliance and privacy. So a couple things I want to make sure we all understand, so if we all have a common base of knowledge, right? So Copilot honors your existing permissions. Copilot returns data from retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, against the Microsoft Graph API. When it pulls that information back from the Microsoft Graph, it's only doing it based on the permissions of the user who made the prompt. So again, it's important. You're not going in to Copilot to assign it global admin rights or something like that, right? It's on behalf of. So the rights that I have against the graph versus the rights that Michael have are different. Therefore, we will get different responses based on what's retrieved. So again, it's under the life cycle of the policies and audit requirements. And we'll get into all details of these when we start to do the demo. It protects against data loss and insider risk, investigation, non-compliant, unethical use, addressing oversharing and applying recommendations, and then leveraging assistance to meet the regulatory requirements using Compliance Manager. So leaders are concerned about data oversharing and data leaks. GenAI tools might grant faster access to content with incorrect permissions or making these files easier to locate. Surprise, surprise, same problem we've had with unstructured data for a long time. Security leaders want to quickly identify risky AI use, such as when somebody suddenly begins interacting with a large volume of sensitive data using GenAI. And then leaders also want AI governance and risk visibility during insights into prompts and responses, so that way they can comply with the organization's use policy. So how we do that, Microsoft is addressing oversharing concerns by getting you increased visibility over overshared content that can help you remediate excessive permissions and then prevent Copilot agents from processing sensitive files. And a lot of that's done with DLP, which we'll get into much later. We can protect against data loss and insider risk, looking at sensitive files and getting alerts of risky behavior and dynamically applying security policies based on risky actions. And then again, leveraging the interaction of the content and audit logs to be able to investigate compliance and ethical violations, and leveraging eDiscovery and Microsoft for legal holds to monitor all of that. So I want to take a moment and kind of just level set with everyone on the call. I'm assuming we have all sorts of different backgrounds and understanding of not only Gen AI, but Copilot, not only data security, but Purview. But one of the key functionalities or features that Microsoft Purview has is what we refer to as a sensitivity label. So a Purview sensitivity label is a stamp or a tag that you put onto a document or a container, but we'll keep it simple for this part. We're just going to talk about documents. So being able to stamp a document as being highly confidential, right? And this, as you can see here, is an example of a label hierarchy that we built out in my demo lab. These are customizable, flexible. You can build them out however you want and make different levels of priority. All those tags, those stamps, those sensitivity labels are stored in clear text. So even if the file's encrypted with the encryption Purview encryption service, you're still able to detect that tag as being like highly sensitive, for example, or in this example, Project Falcon. And that persistence is that tag continues to follow that file wherever it goes. So that way, if you are encrypting it and you are tagging it and you have the controls to detect it outside of Microsoft M365, you're able to do that. So they can classify and protect sensitive information regardless of where it exists, right? So with files and emails and Office apps using encryption and content marking, we can leverage third-party apps with Defender for Cloud apps or the Microsoft Information Protection or MIP SDK to leverage labeling of files. We can put container labels on M365 groups and SharePoint sites, which can then affect privacy, access, and external sharing controls. We can leverage data in Power BI and assets in Azure, including SQL columns and Azure Blob storage. So what can we configure in a label, right? We can control access to content. We can do that by saying inside my company versus outside my company, or we can say the HR department, or we can even say Michael Goad himself instead of everybody else. So we can put any sort of access control based on the label, and I'll show that again in the demo later. We can physically mark the content. We can create watermarks, headers, and footers. We can put content protection on containers. Again, we're talking about Teams and M365 groups and SharePoint sites. And we can also either apply that label automatically or recommend a label or rely on users to manually do those labels. So appreciate everyone's patience as we kind of did that, but I wanted to make sure everyone had a chance to kind of understand labels. So if we talk about how Microsoft Copilot leverages or uses labels, I want you to think of two key pillars: label adherence and label inheritance. Adherence and inheritance. So Copilot adheres to the label access control, meaning that if we have a label and it's scoped to only allow this group or this user to see those files and interact with them, then if, let's say, Michael is in part of a group that's part of a secret project called Project Falcon, and I am not, he's tented in. So he has access to everything that is labeled Project Falcon. So if he asks Copilot about Project Falcon, it will retrieve information about Project Falcon that he has access to, meaning those documents that have been labeled Project Falcon that he has the ability to read. Whereas I, as a user, Project Falcon labeled files are not admissible to me. I cannot see them. I'm not read into that label. Therefore, when I ask Copilot about Project Falcon, the Copilot will return no results because I don't have any access to those Project Falcon labeled files. The other side of it is inheritance. So Copilot generated content inherits the most sensitive label of its sources. So if you were to ask about, hey, can you pull me everything from this particular part of my OneDrive around this topic? It will gather up the files to give you a summary or FAQ or whatever you're asking about. And it will then add a stamp not only to the content that it generated in chat, but if you were to do it in an application, let's say you wanted to create a PowerPoint based on a Word document. If that Word document had that Project Falcon label on it, then the PowerPoint that you created from that source document would inherit the label. Okay. So we talk about the addressing oversharing concerns, right? again, we're talking about gaining visibility in overshared content, looking at those excessive permissions, and looking at preventing Copilot from processing sensitive files. So what is oversharing, right? It's right again, Copilot agents access data that the individuals have access to. But oversharing happens when an employee has access to information. It's the principle of least privilege, right? So if you don't adhere to that, or if that scope creeps out beyond, then you have an oversharing situation, right? Whether that's actually saving a file to a SharePoint location that's not protected or has a lower default label placed on it. User sharing content with someone who should not have access, or files that don't have access protections on them. So as we start to look at leveraging Purview in our oversharing assessments, we can start to look at things that are sites and files with sensitive data that are shared broadly and frequently accessed, right? If we look at those dimensions, we can then kind of prioritize the risk. For example, we have a site that contains credit card numbers, and everyone in the organization has access, and 575 unique users have accessed it within the past week. That's probably a higher prioritized risk remediation, right? And again, this is to help set you up for success when you're looking at generative AI and what it has access to, specifically Copilot. When Michael's going to talk to you next week about SharePoint Advanced Management, you can take your lessons learned from these risk assessments to start applying the ability for a site to be accessed or not by Copilot. So SharePoint restricted search, etc. So again, we're going to try to restrict the user and Copilot agent access to their risky sites. We're going to act on policy suggestions. We're going to remove org-wide access as needed. And then that's kind of the prep. And then we start rolling Copilot, right? We get notifications when new oversharing occurs, further secure sensitive data, and improve Copilot and agent responses by archiving or deleted unneeded content. Again, leveraging SAM to take a look at some of those sites that are not being accessed, or leveraging the ability for data lifecycle management and a retention schedule to get rid of some older documents that are not of value anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop into a demo. We're going to take a look at a few things. So if you'll bear with me as I switch screens. Okay, so looking at our solutions here, we're going to take a look at information protection, because first thing I want to show you is labels. So I go here in the sensitivity labels. You can see I've got a few. We mentioned those earlier in that screenshot where we have Project Falcon, etc. And as we look, you can have sub-labels. So like under confidential, I've got an anyone unrestricted confidential label. I also have confidential all employees. So if we look at this one, we can see here on the flyout, confidential data require protection, which allows employees full permission. Data owners can track and remote content. It's applied to this scope. It has access control, has content marking, right? So if we look at that, what that actually means, so you get a feel for what you can do within the label. Move next, define the scope. We're going to control access and apply content. We assign the permissions now, assigning the permissions to my organization here. So these are the two domains that are in my demo tenant, meaning that basically anybody within the organization can co-author that. Anyone not inside my organization cannot. And then having some content marking here by putting a footer of classified as confidential. So it gives you an idea of kind of the structure of labels. So then if we move over to my demo desktop, here we can see we have Copilot, and we can look at some interactions that I did just a little while ago. So if I pull up my pane here and have a couple documents, right? How to pick the perfect pumpkin and carve a jack-o'-lantern, right? Now, as you can see here, I have sensitivity label of general, anyone, unrestricted. Okay, this is like, so if I wanted to share this document outside the organization, I'd change it to general anyone. Here you see I can pick any of these, but this one is general anyone. So just again, confirming that's what the sensitivity label is on this. So I asked Copilot, Please summarize how to pick the perfect pumpkin in garbage jack-o'-lantern dock. In doing that, right, it created this nice little summary. And then you'll see here, it branded the generated output. It labeled it as general anyone. And if you look at my sources, here's that document, and it shows its sensitivity label here as well. Now, I have another document here, which is the customs use and symbology of pumpkins and Halloweens. But you can see this has a different label on it. It's confidential all employees. Again, here, confidential all employees. And we saw from that label earlier, that's only for users within the organization. So I went ahead and asked, summarize customs use symbology, etc. Right? So just like I did in the last one, but with a more sensitive file, here you can see it got brand confidential all employees. And again, the sources were referenced along with the labels there as well. So to give you an idea, that's how label inheritance works when we start referencing these things. And then we're going to go back to the sharing assessments for DSPM for AI. So I'm moving to another demo environment. This one's got a lot more activity in it. It's a shared demo environment, so I can kind of show you some of these data risk assessments inside of DSPM for AI. So this is where we start talking about, like, we are running a default assessment. We're looking at assesses the oversharing and sensitive data of the top 100 SharePoint sites based on how many times the sites are accessed. Results are derived from the data over last 30 days. So if I look at the details here, I can start to look at those different axes, right? So how much sensitive data, how permissive are the permissions on it, and how active has it been, to give me a picture of where I probably need to focus. So if I see here, there's a site here that's got a lot of items that were accessed, how many times they're accessed. Unique users, though, is pretty small. Whereas this one might be a little better because we see here we've got sensitive information types detected, no sensitive, 19, sensitive detected, 3, right? So we can look at the identify here. We can, let's say we wanted to put a new classifier, or if there were some things here that were not scanned, right? I can quickly look at identify, and I can run an estimation to do what's called our cold file scan or on-demand scanning. And this can give you a quick scan of taking a look at the documents there and gives you an estimate for it when it comes up. So hopefully it loads here. Yep. And it tells me, hey, we did a scan progress and we have 49 files, and here's going to cost you 10 cents to do the scan on that one. And you can get these estimations ahead of time, so that way, in case you're wondering, oh, hey, I've got that file with a lot of different in here, like let's say this one. So if I close this tab, look at this one, should give me the same file. And again, there's an estimation that can be ran on that as well. So let's say, hey, I look like I really want to protect this, right? So I have some different options here. We can restrict access by label. We can restrict all items. We can create a default sensitivity label for the document library. We can assign a default sensitivity label, or we can use an auto labeling policy, right? So all sorts of different things that you can do around protecting it. And you can even create a sensitivity label for the SharePoint site. Again, this won't do anything to the files themselves, but you could do a conditional access policy that states a user has to perhaps invoke MFA or some other sort of conditional access policy based on that SharePoint label. You can create retention policies here, which we'll go over a little bit farther. This gives you some guidance around doing things around SharePoint and leveraging that. You can do an access review as well. So you can start to leverage your SharePoint Advanced Admin portal to kick off an access review, or run it from Entra by doing some things with identity. So again, this ties in together as a platform to kind of give you an idea of what you're up against. I go back, move on to our next section. So we're going to protect against data loss and insider risk. Right? Get alerts and reports about risky AI use, protect sensitive files and interactions, and dynamically apply security policies based on risk actions, right? So again, what is it? I think we all know what data loss and insider risk is here, right? But being able to leverage Gen AI to find data, maybe sharing it appropriately, transferring sensitive data, misusing authorized access to cause harm. Copilot agent creates documents that aren't protected by default. Copilot agent access summarized sensitive data in a way that violates guidelines. Credentials are compromised. A bad actor uses Copilot or agent access to sensitive data. Employee resigned and wants to keep company IP, etc. So those are all different problems around insider risk and data loss. So what we can do is we can get reports of risky behavior in AI use, whether that's sensitive interactions, understanding what's going on in the environment, seeing a prompt injection attack, being able to view the details, escalate that for investigation and investigate. And then monitoring prompt texts and response texts and things that were accessed during those. And again, I'll show that to you in the next section as we do a demo there. These are primarily leveraged within DSPM for AI and in the Activity Explorer and reports. Protecting sensitive file and Copilot agent interactions. So leveraging things like auto labeling, being able to detect sensitive information in the M365 environment within documents and then applying labels. Whether that's Project Falcon, as you saw earlier, or in this example, mergers and acquisitions. And again, we talked a little bit about this. I showed you in the demo. We had, hey, please summarize this doc. This doc had this protection on it. Or Copilot create a new summary of that, created documents and responses. And then you can create a DLP policy that prevents labels that are filed, a certain file label, unable for Copilot to summarize or interact with. So, okay, summarize this document. Document is currently protected. And I'll show you that in the demo as well. And then being able to take a look at things like adaptive protection, which is a little more advanced. I'm not going to get into it in this demonstration, but I encourage you to read further into it. But it's basically being able to leverage our insider risk management tool set to create a policy around risky use of AI, monitoring for different chats and responses, the trigger sequence to start looking at a pattern of risk over time, which can then elevate the risk of profile of a user. Let's say he gets risk rated high because of the interactions he's been doing and the sensitive data he's been interacting with. You can then create different controls that can block access to different things, whether that's through DLP, blocking access to sensitive information if your risk profile is high, but if your risk profile is low, you can have access to it, etc. So again, different capabilities that we have and a little more advanced functionality of leveraging insider risk management and DLP. How am I doing on time? I'm doing pretty good. Okay, so we're going to switch over and we're going to look at, all right, great. We're going to start taking a look at some of the policies, right? So as we look at some of the policies, I go to my data loss prevention, because what we're going to talk about now is we're going to create a policy that prevents Copilot from interacting with a particular sensitivity label. So I go to my data loss prevention and I go to my policies. You should see a policy here for prevent Copilot from processing labeled documents Falcon, which hopefully that should be pretty self-explanatory, but here we are. It's on, prevent, admin units none, Copilot is the location, and the policy settings are for this particular DLP rule. So let's edit that policy so you can see. Actually, I don't want to do that. I want to create a brand new policy. So I'll walk you through kind of how you would create this policy, right? So data stored in the connected sources, meaning like, hey, an M365 or any sort of the source that you've connected. We're going to do a custom because we're going to be talking about Copilot with sensitive labels. I'm going to call this custom policy 2. You would call this, obviously whatever you would make sense to you canonically. And then being able to move into admin units, which is beyond the discussion of the scope, but we're going to just go ahead and continue to say all. And this is where in your DLP policies, you select the workspace or scope. And I'm going to, for the purpose of this demonstration, just focus on M365 Copilot. Now you'll notice in actions, we can edit here. This is whether you're going to include a specific user group or users or all users and with an exclusion, etc. Right? So for this demonstration purposes, we're going to do all users and groups. We're going to create a customized advanced DLP rule because that's our only option. Now, creating a rule for DLP, we give this a name. We'll call this custom rule 2. We'd have a description in here. Now, conditions. Every DLP policy has to have a condition and an action. That's the whole point of DLP. I see something present, some condition is present. I therefore take some sort of action. So in this example, content contains, and the only choice that I have is sensitivity labels. And then I see my little fly out here and I can say, hey, Project Falcon is no-go for Copilot interactions. Then my condition, whoops, I don't want to do an AND operator because this is going to be a very simple rule. So Project Falcon, add condition. No, I'm not going to add a condition. Add an action because, again, we have our condition already. Sensitivity labels, Project Falcon is content contains. The action, restrict Copilot from processing content. It's that simple. And then we have an alert here to turn on the DLP alert. We hit save. We go to next. Now, policy mode, you can run this in simulation mode. That way you can kind of basically have it as a read only. It won't take any sort of action, but will alert you and everything else that will show up normally in the portal. Or you could turn the policy on immediately, right? And that's where we would hit next, and we to basically the confirmation screen, which I'm not going to go to because I want to cancel. So we're confirming we're canceling that. So you see the DLP policy rule here. And if I go over back to my desktop and I try to, oh, I forgot to show you this. I apologize. So I mentioned earlier about inheritance. So we're going to put the DLP policy off to the side because I want to make sure I get this across to you as well. When we talked about inheriting, right? Each one of these inherited the sensitivity label of what it was going for, right? Well, what if I mix them, right? So in this one, I said, hey, create an FAQ of both of these files, right? So both the file that's general, no protection, and the one that's restricted to confidential, all users, right? So create an FAQ blending both of these. You can see here my sources. I have both the higher level sensitivity and the lower level sensitivity. But you'll see Copilot chose the more sensitive one. So it's always going to pick the highest sensitivity of the source documents when it generates its output. So now that I've got over that, let's get down to the next one where I say uploaded this Project Falcon document here, right? Here's a project document charter for Falcon. And you can see it's labeled with Project Falcon, sensitivity Project Falcon. So when I uploaded this into Copilot and said, hey, summarize this document. The file Project Falcon Charter Doc contains restricted content, cannot be summarized due to your organization's security policy. So the important thing is here is you obviously can see that I have the file open on my desktop. I can read the document as a user, but because I've created a DLP policy that states Copilot will not interact with anything with this label, it in fact prevents the summarization. Same thing. This even works within the application itself. So if I could say, please summarize this document, Copilot, if the demo gods are with me, should say, hey, I can't do that, right? Restricted due to the organization's security policy. So again, whether it's in the app, in the browser, or in the app itself, you can see the DLP policy is honored. I'm going to move back here. We're going to go back to Content Explorer inside of DSPM for AI. And we're going to take a look at some of those activities that we saw. Again, this is coming back to being able to monitor all those chats and responses and kind of understand what sensitive data or DLP rules were violated, etc. So if I go to Activity Explorer under DSPM for AI, and I start to look at all the different things here, you can do like, hey, I'm just curious about a particular sensitive information type. Maybe I'm curious if the web was searched or not, in case I want to check some things that were submitted to the Bing API with web-grounded chat. Maybe I'm only concerned about a particular sensitivity label, right? Project Falcon, for example. Or I'm looking for a particular app category, right? Since I don't have anything beyond Copilot in this tenant environment, that's all I have. But I go look at the app, it's always going to be Copilot. But if I look at app access, I should see some different like Edge or Word or in Copilot or Copilot chat. So if you look here, we'll look at some different sensitive information types. We had sensitive information type. We had interacted in here where I said, let's see, it was an AI interaction, Megan Bowen. It was within the app was Word. Can you summarize this document? You can see the response right here. So again, I'm curious, it will load up the document and show me. I go down here a little farther. We have some other ones that I was doing earlier. And in fact, I think if I look at the last one from yesterday, you can even see where I attempted to do jailbreak by having Copilot try to interdict and not pay attention to any of its grounding rules. You can see the response I got was, sorry, it looks like I can't respond to this, try a different topic. And again, we see this in logging, disengaged by the jailbreak classifier. Now, if I had insider risk management policy set up along with communication compliance policies, which I'll show you in the next section, I would have detected this as a jailbreak attempt and would have been notified for that as well. So you don't have to just rely on trying to find it in Activity Explorer. You can set up some different alerting capabilities on this. And again, the jailbreak attempt did not succeed. It failed, but I did see it, so it was recorded. So I kind of want to get that across. Okay, so then last bit is we want to kind of look at insider risk management and see some of the things that you can see there. For that, I'm going to go to a little more higher activity environment. So if I go to my solutions and I go insider risk management, which is right here, and I go to alerts. As these populates, I'm going to do a quick search for my user once I have it up on the screen. Here we go. You can see DSPM for AI detects when users viewing, and then exfiltration monitoring. So in this alert, pull up the Activity Explorer. I'll only shut down Copilot because it's going to try to tell me what went on here. So you can see here, a risky prompt was entered into Copilot. Sensitive response was received. Reason why this isn't showing up is because I don't have the proper rights in this shared demo tenant because I'm not a global admin, and I don't have the different RBAC policies underneath Purview, which would allow me to see that. But you can see there's a whole sequence of events here that were detected with our insider risk management policy for detecting AI risky use or data exfil monitoring. If I take a look at the risk factors and close this detail and minimize this for a more screen, a triggering event was using a browser to upload files to the web. Since the files containing these different types and employee info under our exact data match capability. If I want to look at user activity, again, being able to look at some different sequencing events around, hey, access to a lot of sensitive info, content was copied from sensitive files, the file was then deleted off the desktop, and I browsed the return of AI site. So being able to do this sequence detection under our insider risk management and being able to alert you to different things that can happen in your environment with Gen AI, not only Gen AI and Copilot, but then also within third-party Gen AIs, you could see that I visited a couple of different Gen AI sites, including Gemini and ChatGPT. Yeah, Gemini here was in this example. And then I got sensitive info coming back from Copilot. All right, well, let's get back to presentation. So we're going to talk about governing AI use to meet regulations and policies. All right. So We're going to make sure that Copilot and agents adhere to the organizational policies and regulatory requirements. Governance forced by a set of compliance management controls, right? Options include interaction with existing compliance management, legal processes alongside other M365 content, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we've got a regulatory scheme and internal policies, and we're leveraging Purview to allow Copilot interactions to live within that framework, right? So we configure admin controls, sort compliance for specific regulatory frameworks, which I'll show you in Compliance Manager. We limit exposure for misuse, identifying issues early and mitigating them quickly. So actually operationalizing, looking at that Activity Explorer and turning on those different policies and rules and alerts so that way you can manage the risk of generative AI. Being able to leverage things like retention policies to remove access to outdated information. And if you aren't quite ready to do things like set a retention policy for all SharePoint, Adam will show you different things that you can look at in SharePoint Advanced Management and being able to do things like archiving particular, we'll call them legacy or perhaps dead sites that have information that's not quite as relevant anymore. And then keep the content based on a retention policy for Copilot, which we'll dive into here very quickly. So again, audit interactions, enforcing lifecycle policies, and legal holds, right? You kind of saw, we'll show you where in the audit log you'll see the entries for the different Copilot interactions. I'll show you where you can set the retention policy for Copilot and being able to leverage legal hold within eDiscovery to include Copilot interactions and with agents and with Copilot chat if you so wish. And again, being able to do things around the communications compliance, taking a look at insider trading, corporate sabotage, jailbreak attempts, etc. Being able to do the admin search against the content. So we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between the audit log and the content of the prompts. But the idea is being able to do a content search within eDiscovery and export that out for further investigation or evidence if you necessary for like a separation or law enforcement, et cetera, if actions need to be taken against a particular user, and then being able to track all that regulatory framework, leveraging Compliance Manager. Okay, so we're going to jump into data lifecycle management. So if I go to my solutions and I go to data lifecycle management and we look at retention policies. So here we go. We have different retention policies. I've got one for Copilot interactions. As you can see here, I'll show you the quick what I have currently set up, and then we'll jump right in and try to create one real quick. So all admin units, it's just scope to Copilot experiences, keep content and delete if it's older than 3 months, and there is no preservation lock. Now, again, thing you must remember, retention policies win, but they are overruled by eDiscovery hold. So if you have a legal hold, that will go over the retention policy, right? Until you release that legal hold. That's all I'll say about that. If you want more details, maybe we'll set up something about just eDiscovery. But that's what you need to know for this. So retention policies, right? So if I do a new retention policy, I'll call this test 2. Administrative units, we'll select all. We're going to use a static scope. Now, here as you can see, we can set different retention policies for different users and groups based on different workloads. You might start seeing a theme here where we built it one way for, like, let's say, auto labeling or DLP, et cetera, right? So here we're going to say Microsoft Copilot experiences. And again, we can edit it to particular users. We can say people are excluded, included, excluded. So we're saying here, include all users, exclude none, right? Then we're going to go next. And then we can say retain for a specific period. You can drop this down to custom like I did. I made this 0, turn this into 3 months, 0 days. And then I say delete items automatically. So again, this is how you would set the policy up. I'm going to cancel that, showing you that. Next, we're going to talk about audit. So everybody, and I want to also preface this. So this demo environment that I have set up, I do not have M365 Copilot licensed. All I have is Copilot chat with web grounding. So everything that you're seeing here as far as interactions I've searched for is what you could do today for anyone you have enabled for just Copilot chat with web grounding or without web grounding. But again, you don't have to have fully licensed users to play around with this stuff and scope policies to just yourself and start tinkering with this. So in this example, I want to look for a particular friendly named activity. All right, there we go. And come on. This is where the demo guys are going to start working against me. All right, we're going to do interactions. Interacted with Copilot. And then did a certain date range, as you can see here. And then users, I picked Megan B. All right. So since this takes a little while, I did it last night. For an example here, we can see that we have Copilot interactions. And this is the audit log for this, right? This is what it did. Read this document, how to pick a perfect pumpkin, and the customs around symbology of pumpkins, and then create a FAQ, right? Now, again, it's just talking about the file it referenced. It did a read. File it referenced, it did a read, right? So it was done in Edge. So when we think about audit, think about limited, very specific audit fields with very specific input and output. Can be somewhat variable. The difference between this is like if you were to pull the audit log of email, you would see that I had sent an email to Michael Goad, and Michael Goad had sent an email back to me. But it wouldn't go into the content of the email because it could be variable length and really long, could have attachments, etc. So what we're trying to do here is much like the audit log is the activity and gives you that, which you can export out. And then if we want to get into what's actually in the content, we move over to eDiscovery. And then we leverage content search. Now in this content search I did last night, you go to this query. Basically, you set up the query much like we did with the audit log, right? We're looking for Copilot interactions for Megan B. So this loads up. I will have, if I were doing a new one, I would say I'm going to do a content search and I'm going to look for a particular scope to a user. You can do it by user group, the entire organization. And while this loads, Michael or Matt, is there anything in the Q&A that we're unable to answer?
We've got a question in chat, but I think Matt's on it, so we're good.
Okay, great. All right. I was hoping to buy some time as this loaded up. Let me do this.
Well, loads. I think, are there any kind of lessons learned that you've kind of had around how we kind of understand interactions with Copilot? I think that's the biggest question I get.
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is get to knowing DSPM for AI. That's really the kind of the central place where you're going to be leveraging a lot of this stuff. If I duplicate this tab and I kind of just quickly show you the solutions, right? DSPM for AI. This gets you started, really helpful, right? And then there's recommendations here that can kind of help you set up policies. You automatically go. So like, I want to set up insight into communications, right? There's a couple warnings about some stuff. It tells you the next steps to take. And in fact, even some of these, let's see. So like here's about getting assessments. It takes you right to the assessments. These policies that I set up here, these were all just a box down at the bottom that said, hey, do you wish to create these policies? It can automatically create it for you. And then lastly, kind of getting an Activity Explorer, understanding what you're seeing, whether the prompts and responses, being able to look at those very quickly, being able to see the resources, whether it was something that was uploaded to it or it was the Bing web chat. return on a URL, and the search terms are listed in here as well. So those are some of the things that I've always tried to advise customers to keep an eye on. And okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go to content search. And I'm going to create a search. I'm going to say demo search. So I can at least show you, I don't have to complete the search. Demo search, and then the query should load up. And here we go. All right, so I'm going to add sources. This is where I was looking for the user that I was going to add, which is going to be Megan B. And I'm going to checkbox, manage. And then I'm going to X this, and then I'm going to get rid of keywords. I'm going to add a condition, and we're going to do a item class contains any, and I'm going to say Copilot activity. Boom, right there. And then you can add a condition to say date. And you can do before and after, or just an before, just an after. If I just do an after yesterday, and then I can run a query. And then I'm going to say, hey, actually pull me back a sample, right? Because I know there's not a ton in there. So let's run that query. And then we'll just give this a couple seconds and see if it populates. Quick time check. Looks like I got about 11 minutes. And that's about all the content I've got. So, oh no, it's still running. For a minute there, I thought I put the wrong date in. But now I'm looking at it, it looks like you'll see this little line up here slowly rotating. It's going to generate a view. Some things will fill in here. As you click through them, you'll get what the actual response is. So what you would do is you could then export this out for evidence, like I said, into speaking with that user, or, if it was a separation thing for inappropriate use, et cetera, you'd have the ability to have this file on file, ready to go as evidence for the separation. So let's see here. We talked about audit. We talked about eDiscovery. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie off on Compliance Manager. So we're going to pivot over there. And we're going to talk about Compliance Manager. Now, Compliance Manager is a tool in Purview that helps you track progress against different regulatory schemes. There's just like the original Compliance Manager about your data environment. This is like your base Microsoft score, much like a Microsoft Secure score you may know from Defender. But what you can do is you can create your own assessments based on regulatory frameworks. And here you can see there's a data protection baseline. Again, that's that secure score one. But then we also have one here for NIST. You can add another one if you want to add assessment, right? You'd say, hey, select your regulation. And let's say I'm looking for one for the EU AI. Let's just see if EU comes up. EU Artificial Intelligence Act, right? Just hitting save, hitting next. I want to do Microsoft 365 because that's where Copilot is. We can create that assessment. And it's really that easy to start then having the Microsoft built out recommendations and tests for the different assessments. So if I go back to my assessments here and I'm looking at the NIST risk management framework, get a little more screen back. Here's the details, is incomplete. This gives me a little information about the NIST risk management framework for AI. And then I can see my progress, things that are completed, things that have failed medium risk, failed high risk. I can look at the individual controls. So govern, continuous monitoring and governance. And I can see flag risky communication and content and AI interactions. Well, as you saw from what I was looking at earlier, we were leveraging not only policies to detect it, but we also had the Activity Explorer and we were reviewing it, right? So implemented and passed. You can see here the automatic testing type there. Whereas some of the other are like investigate, so Microsoft detected that those policies are in place and that data is being sent. What we did not do is we can't detect whether or not you as a user or as an IT professional are actually leveraging these tools, right, to do the investigations. So if you had a test where, hey, I had both the audit log and the content explorer, I've zipped that up, I've done a review in activity explorer, and you wrote that up and added that evidence here, right, as a document or a link to your standard operating procedure of how you investigate, then you can mark this as complete. Overall, giving you an idea of how you're meeting the different controls for this assessment framework. So that's what we leverage Compliance Manager for. I think that brings us back to our demo, which I believe the blogs that we've created, Michael's created about this presentation, this series will have links. One of those links is the Security for AI assessment. So being able to leveraging an assessment questionnaire to identify key gaps, right? Download a report and keep the momentum going, all to help you prepare, discover, protect, and govern, right? Your M365 Copilot and agents. I believe I'm at the end. So with 6 minutes to spare, Michael, I think you're muted, buddy.
I am. Thanks, Matt. Thanks. No questions in the chat that I see so far, but I guess I'll ask you this one last question,
Sure.
Charlie, because it's probably one of the bigger ones I get during any of my Copilot interactions with our customers. We saw a lot of cool stuff. I've got E3 and I've got E5. What are some of the differences that you're going to see between what we showed here, between what type of licensing I have?
That is a fantastic question. So a lot of what you saw today was requires advanced licensing, right? So when we talk about E5, a lot of the things that are in DSPM are E5 only. DSPM for AI, which is what I specifically talked about today, has a limited set of things that you can see as part of E3. You won't see a lot of those chats and responses like you normally see, like with the E5 license. You would not see that, but you would see like if there was a DLP policy that was violated, if there was sensitive data uploaded, etc. So all those things you can see in Activity Explorer. You just wouldn't have a detail. That would require you then to go back to the audit log, right, to get the interactions on the details, and then go to the eDiscovery content search in order to find the prompts and responses. So that's one of the major ones that really stick out to me as the difference between E3 and E5. There is a fantastic
legwork.
Yeah, it does. It really, and that's what really E5 and Purview does. It really is a force multiplier time reduction saver. Another thing, like with labels, like you can create your labels, you can publish those labels to users, but if you only have E3, the users are required to actually apply it. So there's only client-side labeling. There's no automatic labeling based on classifiers, right? There is a fantastic Copilot readiness, which we will make sure that's available on the website. There is basically a Copilot readiness for E3 and one for E5. It has a blueprint and timeline and suggestions for what you can do as a data security person, leveraging both Purview and SharePoint Advanced Management to get ready for Purview at E3 and operationalize the security around it, and what you can do for E5. So I think that would be a great guide that we can include as another hyperlink from the blog.
Cool. Mentioning the labels, one of the things that I learned recently from a customer, they went through, they had E5 and they're going through the process of doing the auto labeling. So they had to create all their templates and their classifiers and identifiers. And they ended up using one of the templates, one of the things they ran into is they were getting a lot of false positives because their organization's classifiers and their own organization's terminology didn't exactly match the template. And so it actually caused them about 6 months of extra legwork. They solved it by creating their own custom template, essentially, and that is what fixed all their issues. But just something I learned recently that if you start going down the labeling path, what they did is they actually ended up talking to their infrastructure management team to say, hey, what are the languages, what are the classifiers that we use here in the organization, and then apply those to the template. So just that's something that I learned recently that I think as you guys go down this route, make sure you talk to other business units to understand some of that language.
Yes. Yeah, the data labeling and classification, basically your information protection journey from classifiers to labels to DLP to insider risk management. that journey is not one department, not one admin. That is everybody in the organization, right? To understand what sensitive data you have and how to identify it is the number one thing, like you just mentioned, Michael. Leveraging advanced classifiers like trainable classifiers and exact data match, which give you a much higher fidelity, is also good. You can leverage our out-of-box sits or templates if you wish. But again, set up the policy and that's the word I'm looking for, in audit only mode, that basically that first step where you can kind of see the results it gets back and see whether or not it's truly positive or truly false positive, and then iterate from there. And you can take any of those out of box sits and modify them, copy them, and basically modify and tweak them based on things like functions or regex, et cetera, to get them a little bit higher fidelity on those.
Well, that's what we have today. I appreciate it, Arlie. Thanks for giving us an
Yeah,
hour of your time. Super. I learned quite a bit here. I appreciate everybody joining here today, and I look forward to seeing
absolutely.
everyone next week.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to talk.